The silence in the Sterling penthouse was a living entity, a heavy, suffocating presence that clung to the marble floors and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering Atlanta skyline. From the outside, it was a picture of perfection. Elias Sterling, a self-made tech mogul with a jawline as sharp as his business acumen, and his wife, Camille, a former art curator whose grace and beauty were the envy of their social circle. Their life was a curated collection of success, a $50 million penthouse, a private jet on standby, a garage filled with luxury cars. But the one piece missing from their collection, the one thing their immense wealth could not buy, was the sound of a child's laughter echoing through their opulent home. Camille stood on the balcony, the warm Georgia breeze doing little to soothe the cold ache in her heart. 5 years. 5 years of doctor's appointments, invasive procedures, and heartbreaking disappointments. 5 years of watching her friends post pictures of their growing families on social media, each photo a fresh stab of pain. The infertility diagnosis had been a cruel twist of fate, a brutal reminder that for all their power and influence, they were still at the mercy of a biology that had betrayed them. She remembered the day she got the news. The doctor's office had been sterile and cold, the fluorescent lights harsh against her tear-streaked face. The doctor, a kind woman with sympathetic eyes, had explained in clinical terms what Camille already knew in her heart. She would never carry a child. The words had felt like a death sentence, the end of a dream she had nurtured since she was a little girl playing with dolls in her grandmother's living room. Elias found her there on the balcony, wrapping his arms around her, his chin resting on her shoulder. "We'll get through this, Cam," he whispered, his voice a familiar comfort. "We always do." But this time, it felt different. The hope that had once sustained them was dwindling, replaced by a quiet desperation. It was Camille who finally said the word that had been hanging between them for months: surrogacy. Elias was hesitant at first, the idea of another woman carrying their child unsettling. He had always been a private man, protective of their intimate life, and the thought of bringing a stranger into such a sacred space felt wrong. But he saw the raw, desperate hope in Camille's eyes, the way her hands trembled as she clutched the brochure from the fertility clinic, and he couldn't deny her this one last chance. They found a reputable agency, one that catered to high-profile clients and promised discretion and professionalism, and began the process of finding a surrogate. The agency sent them profiles, dozens of them, each one a glossy photograph and a carefully worded biography. But none of them felt right. They were too young, too old, too eager, too detached. Camille was beginning to lose hope when the agency called with one more candidate. Her name was Maya. She was 26, a single mother with a warm smile and kind eyes. She spoke of her own son with a love that was palpable, and her desire to help another couple experience that same joy seemed genuine. She was the perfect candidate, a beacon of hope in their sea of despair. They chose her without hesitation, their hearts filled with a cautious optimism they hadn't felt in years. The embryo transfer was a success. The first ultrasound, seeing the tiny flicker of a heartbeat, was a moment of pure, unadulterated joy. Camille cried, tears of relief and gratitude streaming down her face. Elias held her, his own eyes glistening. For the first time in a long time, the silence in their penthouse was broken by the sound of shared hope, the promise of a future they had almost given up on. The first few months of the pregnancy were a dream. Camille threw herself into creating the perfect nursery, a symphony of soft creams and gentle greens. She spent hours online, researching the best cribs, the safest car seats, the softest blankets. She hired an interior designer who specialized in nurseries, and together they created a space that was both luxurious and comforting, a room fit for the child she had waited so long to hold. She and Elias attended every doctor's appointment, holding hands as they watched their baby grow on the ultrasound screen. They were a team, united in their shared anticipation. But as Maya's belly grew, so did a subtle, insidious distance between them. Maya, at first, was the perfect surrogate. She sent daily updates, pictures of her growing bump, detailed accounts of every kick and flutter. She was attentive, responsive, and seemed genuinely invested in their happiness. But the updates soon became more personal. She started texting Elias directly, sending him funny memes and articles she thought he'd find interesting. She'd call him to complain about her pregnancy cravings, her voice a little too familiar, a little too intimate. She was weaving herself into the fabric of their lives in a way that made Camille deeply uncomfortable. "She texted you again?" Camille asked one evening, trying to keep the edge out of her voice as she saw Elias smiling at his phone. "Yeah, she's craving pickles and ice cream at 2 a.m., he chuckled, shaking his head. "Pregnancy is wild." "It just seems like she contacts you a lot," Camille said, her voice small. "More than me." Elias looked up, his smile fading. "Cam, she's carrying our child. She's going through a lot, and she feels comfortable talking to me. Don't make this into something it's not. We need to support her." Camille fell silent, a cold knot of dread tightening in her stomach. He was right, of course. They needed to support Maya. But her instincts were screaming that this was more than just a surrogate seeking support. This was a woman, methodically, deliberately, inserting herself into her husband's life. She tried to push the thoughts away, to focus on the joy of the impending arrival, but the unease lingered, a shadow over her happiness. The tension came to a head at the baby shower. Camille had planned an elegant, intimate affair at their penthouse, a celebration of the life they were about to welcome. She had invited their closest friends, people who had supported them through the darkest days of their infertility journey. The penthouse was decorated with soft blue and white balloons, a towering cake shaped like a baby carriage, and tables laden with gourmet food. It should have been a perfect day. Maya arrived looking radiant, her hand resting possessively on her swollen belly. She wore a form-fitting dress that accentuated her curves, and she moved through the room with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. She mingled with their friends, telling stories about the pregnancy with an ease that made it seem as though she and Elias were the expectant parents, and Camille was merely a guest at her own celebration. Then came the gifts. As Camille opened a beautifully wrapped present containing a tiny pair of designer shoes, Maya let out a little laugh. "Oh, Elias already bought the baby a pair of those. He came over last week to help me assemble the crib, and he brought the most adorable little gifts. He's going to be such an amazing father." The room fell silent. All eyes turned to Camille, whose smile was frozen on her face. Elias had gone to Maya's house. He had assembled the crib with her. He had bought gifts for the baby without telling her. The betrayal was a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. She felt the walls of her perfect life closing in, the gilded cage becoming a prison of her own making. The woman she had chosen to carry her child was not just carrying her baby. She was stealing her life, piece by piece, moment by moment.
If you're enjoying this story, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on your notifications so you don't miss the next episode.
After the last guest departed, leaving behind a mountain of pastel-colored gifts and a thick, suffocating silence, Camille confronted Elias. The forced smile she had worn all afternoon had dissolved, replaced by a mask of cold fury. Her voice, when she spoke, was a low, trembling whisper that barely contained the storm raging inside her. "You went to her house? You built the crib with her?" Elias had the grace to look ashamed, but it was fleeting, quickly replaced by a defensive wall. His jaw tightened, his eyes hardening. "Cam, it wasn't a big deal. She was struggling with it, and I was just trying to help. I was going to tell you." "When, Elias?" Camille's voice cracked, the sound of her heart breaking audible in the quiet room. "When were you going to tell me that you were playing house with the woman carrying our child? The woman who was systematically trying to replace me?" "You're being hysterical," he shot back, his voice rising, defensive and angry. "She is not trying to replace you. She is a kind, lonely woman who is doing us the greatest service imaginable. The least we can do is be there for her. I can't believe how selfish you're being. After everything we've been through, after everything I've done to make this happen for you, this is how you react? Selfish. The word hit her like a slap, a cruel, cutting blow. She, who had endured years of physical and emotional pain, who had subjected herself to countless procedures, who had poured every ounce of her being into the dream of this child, was being called selfish. The argument escalated. A toxic explosion of all the unspoken fears and resentments that had been simmering beneath the surface for months. It ended with Elias storming out, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled, leaving Camille alone in the perfectly decorated nursery, a room that now felt like a monument to her own naivety, a cruel joke at her expense. The final weeks of the pregnancy were a living hell. The intimacy between Camille and Elias was gone, replaced by a chasm of suspicion and anger. They moved through their penthouse like ghosts, occupying the same space but existing in different worlds. Elias spent more and more time away from home, claiming he was working late on a major deal, but Camille knew he was with Maya. She could feel it in her bones, a sickening certainty that twisted her stomach into knots. The calls, the texts, the secret meetings, it was an emotional affair, a betrayal as deep and painful as any physical one. Maya, for her part, reveled in her victory. Her texts to Camille became more brazen, filled with subtle digs and veiled threats. She would send pictures of herself and Elias at doctor's appointments, the two of them smiling like a happy couple. She would mention inside jokes, shared moments that Camille had been excluded from. She was no longer the sweet, kind woman they had met at the agency. She was a predator, and Camille was her prey, wounded and vulnerable. Camille tried to reach out to Elias, to salvage what was left of their marriage, but he was distant, cold, unreachable. He looked at her with a mixture of pity and resentment, as though she were the problem, the obstacle standing in the way of his happiness. She felt herself disappearing, becoming invisible in her own life, a ghost haunting the edges of a story that no longer belonged to her. The call came in the middle of the night, shattering the fragile silence of the penthouse. Maya was in labor. The drive to the hospital was a blur of anxiety and unspoken accusations. Camille sat in the passenger seat, her hands clenched in her lap, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst through her chest. Elias drove in grim silence, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, his jaw set in a hard line. In the delivery room, the tension was a palpable, living thing, thick enough to choke on. Elias was by Maya's side, holding her hand, whispering words of encouragement, his face a mask of concern and tenderness. He was the doting partner, a role he played with unnerving perfection, as though he had rehearsed it 1,000 times. Camille stood by the door, a spectator at the birth of her own child, an outsider, looking in on a scene that should have been hers. The nurses looked at her with a mixture of pity and confusion, their gazes flicking between the three of them, trying to piece together the fractured, twisted story unfolding before their eyes. After hours of agonizing labor, their son was born. A healthy, beautiful baby boy with a full head of dark hair and his father's eyes. The sound of his first cry was a symphony, a sound Camille had dreamed of for years, a sound that should have filled her with joy, but instead filled her with a deep, aching dread. A nurse cleaned the baby and wrapped him in a soft blue blanket, but instead of handing him to Camille, she placed him in Maya's arms, following the unspoken cues in the room, the way Elias hovered over Maya, the way Camille stood apart, separate, alone. Camille stepped forward, her arms outstretched, her heart aching to hold her son, to feel his weight in her arms, to breathe in his newborn scent. "Maya," she said, her voice trembling, barely more than a whisper, Can I hold him?" Maya looked up, her face a mixture of exhaustion and something else, something cold and triumphant, a look of pure, unadulterated victory. She clutched the baby tighter, turning her body away from Camille in a protective, possessive gesture. "No," she said, her voice flat, emotionless. "You can't." The word hung in the air, a poison dart, sharp and lethal. Camille stared at her, uncomprehending, her mind struggling to process what she had just heard. "What? What do you mean?" "I mean, I'm not giving him to you," Maya said, her gaze flicking to Elias, a silent communication passing between them, a shared secret, a conspiracy. "We're not giving him to you. Elias and I, we're in love. He's going to leave you, and we're going to raise our son together. This is our family now." Camille's world tilted on its axis, the ground beneath her feet crumbling away. She looked at Elias, her eyes pleading with him to deny it, to tell her this was all a horrible, cruel joke, a nightmare she would wake up from. But his face was a canvas of guilt and shame, his eyes unable to meet hers, his silence a damning confirmation. "Elias?" she whispered, the name a prayer, a curse, a plea. "Tell me she's lying." He finally looked at her, and the look in his eyes shattered the last vestiges of her hope, the final fragments of her heart. "I'm sorry, Cam," he said, his voice barely audible, choked with emotion. "It's true. I didn't mean for it to happen, but I fell in love with her. She understands me in a way you never could. She makes me feel alive again." In that moment, Camille felt a pain so profound, so absolute, it transcended tears. It was the death of a dream, the death of a marriage, the death of the life she had so carefully, so lovingly built. A nurse gently touched her arm, trying to guide her out of the room, but Camille stood frozen, her gaze fixed on the man she had loved, the woman she had trusted, and the child she had lost, all in the same breath, in a single, devastating blow that would change her life forever. Camille's grief was a tidal wave, a force of nature that threatened to consume her entirely. She left the hospital in a daze, the sound of her own shattered sobs echoing in her ears, a soundtrack to her devastation. She went home to the penthouse, the silent, gilded cage that had once been her sanctuary and was now her prison. For 3 days, she didn't move from the nursery. She sat in the rocking chair she had so carefully chosen, surrounded by the ghosts of a future that would never be, the pain of physical weight pressing down on her chest, crushing her, suffocating her. She didn't eat, she didn't sleep. She simply sat, staring at the empty crib, her mind replaying the scene in the delivery room over and over, a cruel, endless loop. She thought about ending it all, about stepping off the balcony and letting gravity take her pain away. But something deep inside her, some small, stubborn spark of survival, refused to let her give up. But on the 4th day, something shifted. The grief, still raw and all-consuming, began to crystallize into something else. Anger. A cold, hard, diamond-sharp anger that burned through the fog of her despair. She had been played. She had been manipulated, betrayed, and discarded like yesterday's trash. And she would not let them win. She would not let them take her son, her life, her future, without a fight. She would not go quietly into the night. She called her lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Cassandra, who had handled all of the Sterling's legal affairs for years. Cassandra was a force of nature, a woman who had built her career on taking down powerful men who thought they were untouchable. Camille told her everything, her voice trembling but resolute, each word a declaration of war. Cassandra listened, her expression growing grimmer with every word, her pen flying across her legal pad. "This is a nightmare, Camille," Cassandra said when she had finished, her voice tight with controlled fury. "But we will fight this. The surrogacy contract is ironclad. Maya has no legal claim to the child. And as for Elias, we will make him pay for what he's done." But as Cassandra began to dig into the legal documents, pulling files from her briefcase and spreading them across Camille's kitchen table, she discovered something that made her blood run cold. The surrogacy contract, the one she had drafted herself with meticulous care, had been amended. A new clause had been added, buried in the fine print, a clause that gave Maya the right to contest custody if she could prove a significant emotional and biological bond with the child. The amendment had been signed by Elias and Maya, and notarized by a lawyer Camille had never heard of, a name that meant nothing to her but clearly meant something to Cassandra. It was a legal masterstroke, a move so audacious, so diabolical, it could only have been orchestrated by someone with a deep, intimate knowledge of the law and a personal vendetta. And then Cassandra saw the name of the notary, and everything clicked into place. Her face went pale, her hands trembling as she held the document up to the light, as though hoping it was a forgery. The name was Annalise Devereaux, Elias's ex-fiancée. A brilliant, ruthless lawyer who had been disbarred for unethical conduct 5 years ago. A woman Elias had once described as the most vindictive person I have ever known. Cassandra remembered the case, the scandal that had rocked the legal community. Annalise had been caught fabricating evidence, bribing witnesses, doing whatever it took to win. She had been a rising star, destined for greatness, until her ambition and her lack of ethics had brought her crashing down. Cassandra's mind raced, connecting the dots with the precision of a seasoned investigator. Annalise had been the one to recommend the surrogacy agency to a mutual friend, who had then recommended it to the Sterlings. Annalise had been the one who had, through a shell corporation that Cassandra quickly traced, provided Maya with the funds to pay off her debts before she met the Sterlings, making her the perfect, desperate candidate. Annalise had been the one pulling the strings all along, a puppet master orchestrating a symphony of destruction. This wasn't just about a surrogate who had fallen in love with a wealthy man. This was a long con, a meticulously planned, brilliantly executed act of revenge. Annalise, scorned and humiliated by Elias years ago when he had broken off their engagement to marry Camille, had found the perfect weapon to destroy him. A beautiful, desperate young woman who was willing to do anything for a price. Maya was not the mastermind. She was a pawn in a much larger, much more sinister game. And Camille, the innocent, trusting wife, was the collateral damage, the acceptable loss in Annalise's quest for vengeance. Cassandra called Camille into the kitchen, her voice grim, her face a mask of controlled rage. "Camille, we have a much bigger problem than we thought. This isn't about Maya. This is about Annalise. She's been playing you from the very beginning. This entire thing, from the moment you chose Maya, has been a setup, and we're going to take her down." The revelation that Annalise was the puppet master behind her life's destruction was a strange, cold comfort to Camille. It didn't lessen the pain of Elias's betrayal, the ache of not holding her son, but it shifted the focus of her anger. This was no longer a crime of passion, a tragic love triangle. It was a premeditated act of war, a calculated strike designed to destroy everything she held dear. And Camille, a woman who had spent her life in the rarefied air of art galleries and high society, discovered a part of herself she never knew existed. A warrior, a fighter, a woman who would not go down without a battle. She and Cassandra went on the offensive, assembling a team that would make any corporate raider envious. They hired a team of private investigators, former FBI agents, and forensic accountants who specialized in unraveling complex financial schemes. They hired a public relations firm to manage the media narrative, to ensure that when the truth came out, it would be Camille's story that was told, not Annalise's carefully crafted fiction. They hired expert witnesses, psychologists who could testify to the manipulation tactics used, legal scholars who could explain the fraudulent contract amendment. The private investigators dug into every aspect of Annalise's life, following the money trail like bloodhounds. They discovered a labyrinth of shell corporations, offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland, and secret meetings in hotel rooms and coffee shops across the city. They found emails, text messages, and recorded phone calls in which Annalise had coached Maya on how to seduce Elias, how to alienate Camille, how to play the part of the perfect victim. They found bank transfers showing that Annalise had paid Maya $50,000 up front, with the promise of another $100,000 once the plan was complete. The custody battle was a media circus, a spectacle that dominated the news cycle for weeks. Annalise, representing Maya pro bono as a way to thumb her nose at the legal establishment that had cast her out, was a formidable opponent. She was brilliant, ruthless, and a master of public perception. She painted Maya as a poor, innocent single mother who had been taken advantage of by a wealthy, powerful couple, only to fall in love with the father of her child. She portrayed Camille as a cold, sterile woman who was trying to buy a baby because she was too selfish to carry one herself, a woman who saw children as accessories, status symbols to complete her perfect life. The tabloids had a field day, splashing Maya's tear-streaked face across their covers, hailing her as a modern-day heroine, fighting for her child against the cruel, heartless elite. But Camille refused to be broken. She refused to be the villain in her own story. She took the stand, not as a victim, but as a woman who had been to hell and back and had emerged stronger, tempered by fire. She spoke of her love for her husband, her desperate desire for a child, her trust in the woman who had carried her son. And then, with a voice that was clear and strong, unwavering despite the cameras and the hostile stares, she told the court about Annalise. She laid out the entire conspiracy, the years of planning, the manipulation, the cold, calculated revenge. She presented the evidence, the emails, the text messages, the financial records, the testimony of the private investigators. The courtroom was silent, the jury's eyes wide with disbelief, the spectators leaning forward in their seats, hanging on every word. Elias, who had been sitting by Maya's side throughout the trial, his hand in hers, his face a mask of defiant love, looked as though he had been struck by lightning. He stared at Maya, his face draining of color, his hand dropping from hers as though she had burned him. He saw, for the first time, the truth behind the carefully constructed facade. He had been a fool, a pawn in a game he didn't even know he was playing. He had thrown away his marriage, his honor, his son, for a woman who had never loved him, a woman who had been paid to destroy him, a woman who had used his loneliness and his vulnerability as weapons against him. In that moment, the spell was broken. He saw Maya not as the warm, loving woman he had fallen for, but as a cold, calculating stranger, an actress playing a role. He saw the lies in her eyes, the greed in her heart, the emptiness where love should have been. And he saw the woman he had thrown away, the woman who was now fighting for their son with a strength and courage he had never known she possessed, a woman he had underestimated, betrayed, and abandoned. The weight of his betrayal, of his own monumental stupidity, came crashing down on him like an avalanche, and for the first time in his life, Elias Sterling, the self-made mogul, the master of the universe, broke down and wept in open court, his sobs echoing through the silent room. The jury's verdict was swift and unanimous, delivered after only 3 hours of deliberation. Camille was awarded sole legal and physical custody of her son, whom she named Noah, after her grandfather, a man who had taught her that strength came not from never falling, but from always getting back up. The surrogacy contract was upheld in its original form, the fraudulent amendment thrown out and deemed legally void. Maya was charged with fraud, conspiracy, and perjury, her tearful performance on the stand doing little to sway a jury that had seen the cold, hard evidence of her deception, the emails and text messages that revealed her true nature. Annalise, her legal career already in ruins, was disbarred for life and faced a slew of new charges, including fraud, conspiracy, witness tampering, and practicing law without a license. Her grand, vengeful symphony had ended in a cacophony of disgrace, her name now synonymous with corruption and malice. Camille walked out of the courthouse, her son nestled safely in her arms for the first time, and into the warm embrace of a future she had fought for and one. The cameras flashed. The reporters shouted questions, but she didn't hear them. All she could hear was the soft sound of Noah's breathing, the gentle coo he made as he nestled against her chest. This was the moment she had dreamed of, the moment she had fought for, the moment that made every ounce of pain worth it. The road ahead would not be easy. She was a single mother now, a woman who had been betrayed by the man she loved and the woman she had trusted. But she was not broken. She was not a victim. She was a survivor, a warrior, a mother, and as she looked down at the beautiful baby boy in her arms, his tiny hand wrapped around her finger, she knew that she had everything she had ever truly wanted. Elias, his life in shambles, his reputation destroyed, tried to apologize. He showed up at her door in the middle of the night, drunk and sobbing, begging for a second chance. He tried to explain, to justify, to make her understand that he had been manipulated, that he had been a victim too. But Camille was done. The love she had once felt for him had been burned away in the fire of his betrayal, leaving behind only the ashes of what might have been, the ghost of a marriage that had died the moment he chose Maya over her. She filed for divorce, taking him for everything she was legally entitled to, not out of greed, but out of a cold, hard sense of justice. She took half of his fortune, the penthouse, and a generous child support arrangement that would ensure Noah would never want for anything. She used the money wisely, not to buy more luxury, but to build something meaningful, something that would honor the pain she had endured and help others who had suffered similar fates.
If you're enjoying this story, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on your notifications so you don't miss the next episode.
6 months after the trial, Camille stood in the lobby of a newly renovated building in downtown Atlanta. The sign above the door read, "The Noah Foundation, supporting victims of fertility fraud and surrogacy abuse." It was a dream she had nurtured through the darkest days of her battle, a way to turn her pain into purpose, her trauma into triumph. The foundation offered free legal services to women who had been victimized by unethical surrogacy arrangements, who had been manipulated by desperate surrogates or corrupt agencies. It provided counseling services, support groups, and educational resources. It lobbied for stronger laws to protect intended parents and ensure that surrogacy contracts were honored and enforced. Camille had poured her heart and soul into the foundation, working 18-hour days, meeting with legislators, appearing on talk shows to raise awareness, using her story as a weapon against the injustices she had suffered. The grand opening was attended by hundreds of people, lawyers, activists, women who had been helped by the foundation, and members of the media who had followed Camille's story from the beginning. She stood at the podium, Noah sleeping peacefully in a carrier strapped to her chest, and addressed the crowd. "I stand before you today not as a victim, but as a survivor," she said, her voice strong and clear, echoing through the lobby. "What happened to me was a nightmare, a betrayal of the deepest kind. But I refuse to let it define me. I refuse to let the people who tried to destroy me win. Instead, I chose to fight. I chose to turn my pain into power, my trauma into a tool for change. This foundation is not just for me. It's for every woman who has been lied to, manipulated, and betrayed in her quest to become a mother. It's for every family that has been torn apart by greed and corruption. And it's for every child who deserves to grow up in a home built on love, not lies." The crowd erupted in applause, a standing ovation that lasted for minutes. Camille looked down at Noah, his tiny face peaceful in sleep, and felt a sense of peace wash over her. She had done it. She had taken the worst moment of her life and transformed it into something beautiful, something that would help others, something that would ensure that her son would grow up knowing that his mother was a fighter, a woman who never gave up, a woman who turned darkness into light. Camille sold the penthouse, the gilded cage that held too many painful memories. She bought a beautiful, sprawling home in the suburbs, a home with a big backyard and a tire swing hanging from an old oak tree. It was a home filled with laughter, with joy, with the messy, beautiful chaos of a life well lived. It was a home she had built herself, a testament to her own resilience, her own strength, her own unwavering, unconditional love for her son. Noah was thriving. At 18 months old, he was a happy, curious toddler with his father's eyes and his mother's smile. He loved to play in the backyard, chasing butterflies and digging in the dirt. He loved story time before bed, curling up in Camille's lap as she read to him in a soft, soothing voice. He loved music, dancing around the living room to whatever song was playing, his laughter the most beautiful sound Camille had ever heard. Camille had built a life for them, a life that was simple but rich, filled not with material wealth but with love and purpose. She had a small circle of close friends, women who had supported her through the darkest days and celebrated with her in the light. She had her work at the foundation, which continued to grow and expand, helping more women every month. She had her son, the center of her universe, the reason she woke up every morning with gratitude in her heart. She dated occasionally, but she was in no rush to remarry. She had learned that she didn't need a man to complete her, that she was whole and strong on her own. If love came again, it would be a bonus, not a necessity. For now, she was content with the life she had built, the family of two that was more than enough. One evening, as the sun set over the backyard, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Camille sat on the porch swing with Noah in her lap. He was getting sleepy, his head resting against her chest, his thumb in his mouth. She rocked gently, the swing creaking in a familiar, comforting rhythm. She thought about Elias, who had moved to California and was trying to rebuild his life and his business. She thought about Maya, who was serving a 5-year sentence in federal prison. She thought about Annalise, who had been sentenced to 10 years and would likely never practice law again. And she felt a strange, quiet sense of peace. They had tried to destroy her. They had tried to take everything from her, but in the end, they had only succeeded in showing her how strong she truly was. They had been the storm that had cleared the way for the sun. And in the warm, golden light of her new life, Camille Sterling, the woman who had lost everything, realized that she had finally, truly found it all. She looked down at Noah, his eyes fluttering closed, his breathing slow and steady. "We made it, baby," she whispered, pressing a kiss to the top of his head. "We made it through the storm, and we're going to be just fine, better than fine. We're going to be amazing." And as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Camille closed her eyes and allowed herself to feel something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Not the desperate, fragile hope of the past, but a strong, steady hope built on the foundation of everything she had survived and everything she had become. She was a mother. She was a fighter. She was a survivor. And she was, finally, at peace.
Before you go, tap that like button, leave a comment to let us know what you think, and subscribe so you're always the first to hear our next story. Your support keeps these stories coming.